Hello, welcome to our class. Today we will learn about or we will discuss about nervous system. Nervous system is divided into two, like central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. And today we will just focus on the basics. Not I won't say even the basics, but we will discuss about the brain and its lobes. So the central nervous system is divided into brain and the spinal cord. Otherwise, we will say together brain and the spinal cord we say is the central nervous system. And the peripheral nervous system is divided into motor, sensory neurons. Again, the motor neurons. Motor neurons means जो भी मसल से और ग्लैंड से जो हमारा इंफॉर्मेशन सीएनएस में रिसीव करेगा is again divided into like voluntary somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. And in the autonomic nervous system there is sympathetic division and parasympathetic division. So regarding the peripheral nervous system we will discuss eventually. Today we will focus on the central nervous system, brain. So brain is a complex organ where our thought process, where we receive the information, where we stores information, where our emotion, decision making, problem solving, all these complex activity, motor skill, vision, breathing, temperature regulation, and hunger, other reflexes like vomiting, sneezing, all these complex activity or all these activities are controlled by the brain, and together the brain that extend downwards is the spinal cord, and together we both brain and the spinal cord we say central nervous system. And the brain is divided into two hemispheres, right and the left hemispheres, and this right and left hemisphere is divided by a deep groove is by that is the longitudinal fissure to right and the left. And also there are some grooves you can see inside the like brain. There are some grooves, some bumps and depression. So this bumps is known as gyri, and this groove is called sulcus. And the main groove that differentiate or that divide the brain into right and the left is the longitudinal fissure. And between these two hemispheres there is a connection. That connection is called the corpus callosum. Corpus callosum is a thick neural fiber, thick band of neural fiber between these two hemispheres, which is responsible for communicating or allowing the passage of information from one side to the other side of the brain. We can see what does the right hemisphere, the speciality of the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. In right hemisphere is more dedicated to like creativity, imagination, intuition, holistic thinking, arts, non-verbal cues, rhythm, daydreaming, emotions. And the left hemisphere is responsible or more dedicated to like speech, order, reading, writing, computations, sequencing, logic, mathematics. Now the cerebral cortex. The surface of the brain is called the cerebral cortex, and it is divided into different lobes. And it contains gray matter, and the brain contains billions of neurons, which is responsible for the high level of action in our body. Neurons is known as the structural and functional unit of brain. सो द सेरेब्रल कॉर्टेक्स को चार लोब्स है, चार लोब्स में डिवाइडेड है, फ्रंटल लॉब, पैराइटल लॉब, ऑक्सीपिटल लॉब एंड टेम्पोरल लॉब. हम इसके बारे में इसका क्या रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी है, तो एक लोब में क्या क्या है, प्रोसेस होता है, इसके बारे में हम थोड़ा बहुत डिस्कस कर लेंगे आज. एंड द फ्रंटल लॉब में क्या है, मेनली टू एरियाज है, ब्रोकाज एरिया एंड द मोटर कॉर्टेक्स. ये दो एरियाज रिस्पॉन्सिबल है कुछ चीज के लिए. मोटर कॉर्टेक्स हमारा वॉलेंट्री मोटर फंक्शन का रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी लेते हैं, एंड ब्रोकास एरिया इज रिस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर प्रोड्यूसिंग द लैंग्वेज. हम जो भी सुन लिया, कोई हमें कुछ बोल दिया, उसके बाद हमें कुछ इन्फॉर्मेशन वापस देना है, रिवर्ट करना है, उसके लिए जो प्रोसेस करके हमारा लैंग्वेज प्रोड्यूस होना है, वो कहाँ होता है, ब्रोकास एरिया में होता है. एंड दिस ब्रोकास एरिया इज सिचुएटेड इनसाइड द फ्रंटल लॉब. सो दिस इज पैराइटल लॉब. पैराइटल लॉब में सोमैटोसेंसरी कॉर्टेक्स होता है. जो भी इंफॉर्मेशन सेंसरी इंफॉर्मेशन प्रोसेस होता है ये सोमैटोसेंसरी कॉर्टेक्स में, मेनली पैरेटल लोब में हमारा प्रोप्रियोसेप्टर्स सेंसरी और प्रोप्रियोसेप्टर्स से इंफॉर्मेशन रिसीव करके function होता है. Neurons in the parietal lobe receive information from sensory and the proprioceptors throughout the body. जो भी body से sensory receptors है, neurons है, proprioceptors है, उधर से receive करके फिर interpret करेंगे, like position of the body. और आंखें बंद करके हम देख रहे हैं हमारा नोज में हमें टच करना है, ये सब चीजें पैरेटल लोब का सोमैटोसेंसरी कॉर्टेक्स का फंक्शन के वजह से होता है. Now the occipital lobe. Parietal lobe में somatosensory cortex है, occipital lobe में visual cortex है, and whatever the visual experience we receive is transformed, it is transferred into the visual cortex, and there it process and it the information or we recognize the stimuli. The occipital lobe, the visual processing center, it contains the visual cortex. Like the parietal lobe, it receives the information from the retina and then use the past visual experience to interpret and recognize the stimuli. Now the temporal lobe. Temporal lobe mainly vernix area and mechanoreceptors होता है. जो mechanoreceptors which is present inside the cochlea, inside the hair lining of the cochlea will get activated whenever a sound energy is heard. This sound energy will activate the mechanoreceptors inside the cochlea and then it will send impulses into the auditory cortex, and from the auditory cortex the sound is processed and it is the stimuli is recognized and we hear things. And one more thing is there is a vernix area inside the temporal lobe. This vernix area is responsible for the sound comprehension. Sound comprehension, whatever we heard, after that we have to reply. For that, in order to reply properly, we have to comprehend. So that comprehension of the speech is done by the vernix area, which is situated inside the temporal lobe. So today we discussed about the brain. Brain is a complex organ which has lots of function, like processing the information, receiving the information, storing the information, decision making, memorizing, emotions, all these complex activity, and also other functions like temperature regulation, hunger, vomiting, sneezing. All these activities are controlled by the brain, and brain's outer surface area is called the cerebral cortex, and this cerebral cortex is divided into 4 lobes: anteriorly frontal, then the parietal, and posteriorly occipital lobe and the temporal lobe. And the frontal lobe has the Broca's area and the motor cortex. Parietal lobe has the somatosensory cortex, which is responsible for the perception of the sensation and proprioception. Then comes the occipital lobe. Inside the occipital lobe, there is the visual cortex where we receive the visual experiences or the stimuli. In the visual cortex, it processes the information and we see the things. And the temporal lobe. Temporal lobe has mainly two main feature, like the Broca's area and the auditory cortex. And whatever the sound energy we hear, this energy activates the mechanoreceptors, which is situated inside the cochlea, that is the inner part of the ear. And from there, the impulses is sent into the auditory cortex and it is processed, and then we hear or we recognize the stimuli. The vernix area is responsible for the speech comprehension. So that is it. Thank you. We'll hear in another audio. Thank you.